Okay, good.
Hello, my name is Ellie, and today I'll be talking about the conservative versus liberal media and how it's presenting climate change to the public. So back in 2012, Hurricane Sandy struck the east coast of the United States. As you can see, these are two different articles. This one is from the New York Times, which is in general a more liberal news anchor, and this one is from Fox News, which is in general more of a conservative news anchor. However, and they were also published on the exact same day, October 31st, 2012. However, they contradicted each other. In the New York Times article, they cited Kevin Trenberth, a scientist from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and he said that human-induced global warming has raised the overall temperature of the ocean surface by about 1 degree Fahrenheit since the 1970s. So global warming probably contributed a notable fraction of the energy on which the storm thrived. They basically said in the article that human-induced climate change was the reason for why Hurricane Sandy was so big and large and destructive. However, in the Fox News article, they cited Andrew Weaver, who is a climate scientist with Canada's University of Victoria, and he specifically said that climate change didn't make an ordinary storm extraordinary, saying that human-induced climate change wasn't the reason that Hurricane Sandy was so destructive. So I found this interesting because why did two articles published on the exact same day about the exact same event contradict each other about the cause? So in general, climate change is a well-known topic that we all know about. So the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they published a documentation in 2016 saying how, this is a quote, "There is new and stronger evidence that most of the warming observed over the last 50 years is attributed to human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels or carbon emissions into the atmosphere and greenhouse gases and everything." However, the Pew Research study, here's a picture, says that this was the question they asked. So almost all climate scientists agree that human behavior is most responsible for climate change, basically asking these US adults whether they believe that climate change is human-induced. And as you can see, only 13% of conservative Republicans believed, and only 55% of liberal Democrats believed that climate change was human-induced. Even though the IPCC specifically states in all their documentations that human-induced climate change is a big factor in why global warming is becoming such a big deal. So another topic is the media bias. So Vanessa Anturo, who's an attorney in Denver, was actually one of the first people to create this kind of flowchart, which shows liberal and conservative news anchors and rates them on their facts and then also on their reliability. So this was useful because no one else has basically done this, and she was able to map out certain news anchors, and she found that more liberal-sided papers were more open to explicitly saying whether articles were facts or opinions, and whether they're like editorials, and they also had a habit of like repeating stories more and driving their points, while Republican and conservative medias had more like adjectives and hyperboles in their writing, and also was more open about their political views. So these were some aspects that I'm going to go into with my own sources. And within this, you can see that the liberal sources that I will be using in my study are the New York Times, CNN, and the Huffington Post, which are on this graph, which are all on this side of the spectrum. And the conservative sources are Fox News, the Washington Times, and the National Review, which are all on this side of the spectrum. So I'm trying to look at the differences on how these two correlate. So my gaps in my literature. So Maxwell Boykoff, as a lot of you guys know, wrote this article about the grammar and vocabulary in language and like tones and everything else that go into media writing their articles, basically not looking at what specifically they're saying, but how they're saying it, describing it in more of like a negative way or a positive way, or like if they use more ambiguity and vague words, then he basically describes how these news anchors aren't exactly sure of what they're saying if they use ambiguity and like these certain words that show like that don't really tell the reader anything. So I want to look more into that as well when I do my research, because I think that he focused specifically on media in general in the US, and I want to see how this changes for climate change specifically. And then, so also how different forms of media from one source present differently. So within Fox News, you have the Fox News like web articles and website, but you also have the Fox News broadcasting on TV. And there has been some like talk about how that's different, but I've actually not found any specific information about how like forms of media within news anchors are different. So I also want to try to go into that a little more as well. So my research question is, how do politically opposing media anchors present climate change to the United States public? Looking at Fox News, CNN, the New York Times, National Review, and comparing all of those to see what I can find. My methodology will be a meta-analysis. I will be taking 3 natural destructions that the IPCC has said were cause of human-induced climate change, which is Hurricane Sandy of 2012, the California forest fires of 2018, and the Mississippi floods of 2019. And I will be comparing all these within different news anchors, as I showed in my first slide, and see how they differ within the titles, the tones, what they're talking about. And I can show you, and I started doing this a bit right here. So I will be comparing articles. So this was an article about the California forest fires. As you can see, I took a media source from Fox News and a media source from CNN. And so this was just general information, the date, the political stance, the author, the headline. But then I counted the amount of times they mentioned climate change, and then I talked about like what they said the cause of the fire was. So Fox News said the cause of the fire was the power line sparks, while CNN specifically said that the cause of the fire was climate change. And I continue doing this with pictures and everything. And so my hypothesis is, from my preliminary research, my hypothesis is that media sources on both political sides distort and skew facts and science to fit their political stance, meaning that I don't think only liberal and conservative sides skew, I believe that both do. And the value of my study is to work off my preliminary research and learn why, in general, news sources do this. Why can't they just present the facts that they are given? Why do they have to personalize it and dramatize it and make people unsure of what they're actually reading? Also to find new information within the study and see if there is any common ground in climate change between conservative and liberal parties. Yes. Oh, I went a bit over.
Should I record the oral defense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay, after you chose your research question or your project goal, which information guided your choice of a research method? How did you determine your method?
I think Maxwell Boykoff was like a major, he's at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and he was one of the first articles I found. He did a UN, basically a documentation of like how media throughout the world is presenting climate change. What?
Is it blowing his nose?
Oh, okay. I thought you said
Okay.
So I found him, and I was looking more into him, and I emailed him, and he sent me a bunch of his journals and academic journals, and I was going through those, and I realized that a lot of his research method was a meta-analysis. He was finding articles and then doing studies based on those and comparing those to each other, and comparing like the United States like climate change articles Spanish articles and stuff, and comparing like vocabulary, but also just like how many times like literally what I'm trying to do, like how many times they say one word, like the tone of what they say. So I think that he was a big kind of jumping off point from where my research was, and I have seen him like randomly throughout my constant research. So, and I think that his meta-analysis method was something that I like found that was very useful to him, and I think would be useful to me.
So you're just going to adopt his method in a sense?
Yes, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to do my own research, but I'm going to use his meta-analysis structure and how he has been comparing articles in the past. Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Woo!